Hello, and welcome to the Rossaround Backstage podcast, talking with artists, technicians, musicians, producers, directors, and all the interesting and talented people that make it all happen for you. Hello, everybody. This is Ross Pallone with the Rossaround Backstage podcast, and I'm here in Palos Verdes today with five-time Grammy-nominated and Emmy winner, musician, artist, composer, arranger, conductor, and radio personality, David Benoit. And I'm really pleased that David has agreed to do this interview with me. I've worked for David off and on for a very long time, and he's a great guy. And I have one question for you, David. Mm-hmm. How'd you get into this business?
Well, that's a question for the ages. There's two answers to that. One answer is how the actual business part of it, and the other answer is how did I even get into music? And we were talking a little earlier off mic about kind of interested to know how everything came together all the way back to the beginning. And so part of this story I've told many times, but there's some parts of it I haven't. But the part that some people are familiar with is that I started playing piano by ear when I was about 6 years old. And because my mom would come in and play the piano, we were living in Bakersfield, California, and I had a piano in the bedroom, so she'd come in and play, and I just was fascinated by watching her fingers and the keys move, so I tried to imitate her. And then my parents decided to move to Hermosa Beach. They wanted to be near the ocean. They sold the piano. So that was heartbreaking to me, and for another few years, I begged them to get another one. Never had a piano lesson, but I just knew I loved the instrument. There was some connection that I made. Then I would go to like my grandmother's house and play her piano. I remember kind of coming up with some of my first songs during that time. And then finally, when we bought our home in Hermosa Beach, when I was 13, I convinced them to get a piano, which we did. And my mom antiqued it.
Oh.
Antiquing.
Is it an upright piano, David?
What?
Upright piano?
Upright piano, antiqued. Uh-huh. And I started piano lessons from a guy that had played in piano bars. So I got some classical, but most of the lessons were involving jazz and playing standards. And so I learned quickly because I was very motivated. Probably didn't practice enough technique, but I was always at the instrument, so it was a real love affair, you could say.
So you came home every day after school and went straight to your piano?
Pretty much. I came out after day of school, and finally I think we moved the piano into my bedroom because what was the point of having it in the living room then, because I was the one always playing it. So it went into my bedroom, and I would play, and meanwhile, my math grades were terrible, and I didn't do well in high school, but I was so involved in music. In fact, quick little funny story. We went on vacation to Idlewild, California when I was 15, I think, and I couldn't be without playing the piano, and I got so restless, and I discovered that there was an old town hall, and there was a grand piano in there. And I literally broke into, no one was in there, but I broke through a window.
Oh, breaking and entering.
Breaking and entering.
All right.
So that I could practice and play the piano. Maybe not so much practice, but just be at the instrument.
Yeah.
I remember that. I mean, I really remember it so clearly like it was yesterday. So in terms of now segueing to the business part, I decided to become professional when I was 16. And I think about, we were talking off mic about one of the young men that's playing in my band. Now he's 15 years old, and think how incredibly young he is. But, actually I had a band when I was 16. It was the Dave Benoit. I went by Dave back then, trio. And we got a gig at a coffee house in Los Angeles. It was actually the backstage of the LA Philharmonic. It was my first gig. We didn't even get paid. Maybe we did eventually, but I had a guitar player and a drummer and bass player. And so that's when I decided to become professional. And then the next gig I got was a top 40 gig when I was 17, playing top 40 standards on the Redondo Beach Pier. And
was that in a club?
That was a club where you had the downstairs was the restaurant, the upstairs was the lounge. So I remember my dad meeting me and carrying my Fender Rhodes electric piano up the stairs. He was very nice about helping me in the early days of my career. And back then too, I was one of the only few keyboard players. Everyone was still into guitars and basses and drums, and so I worked a lot because I was one of the few piano players, and I had a Fender Rhodes. So the fact I had a Fender Rhodes electric piano, I think I was busy. Then I got frustrated with living in Hermosa Beach, and I actually moved to Hollywood in 1972.
And how old were you then?
I was 19.
So you had graduated from
graduated from high school. I actually went 1 year to college at El Camino College locally. That was the extent of my college education.
Did you take music classes there?
Yeah, just 2 music classes. That's all I took, like theory and piano. And did well with
and you
those
figured
2.
out quickly that college really wasn't.
It wasn't right for me. I was
to.
very anxious to start playing gigs, and one of the early gigs I had when I was 19 was playing in a club called the Parisian Room. I don't know if you remember that, but it was on Washington Boulevard in La Brea, and I was the only white guy in the club and on the bandstand. So it was quite an education about playing real jazz and playing with African American musicians and getting that feel that I really attribute to how I play today. Was just this background in. I mean, I played strip clubs. I played top 40 bands where I drive down to Orange County 6 nights a week, 5 sets a night. You might remember those days.
Oh yeah.
I mean, real hardcore dues paying. And I'd be so tired driving back. I almost fell asleep at the wheel a few times. It was amazing. I survived that time. I think about it. But that.
So some of those bands were top 40. Some of them were straight ahead jazz.
Yes, a little bit. Yeah, like when I played with Gloria Lynn, when I did the Parisian Room, that was more straight ahead jazz. So I was getting both. And that's a good question because growing up, I never devoted myself. It was never like I'm going to be a straight ahead jazz musician. It was I'm just going to work. I just want to work, whether it's playing at a bar mitzvah, playing Rock the Boat, or it's playing Confirmation by Charlie Parker. Whatever it is, I just wanted to work. So, and then a lot of what I play, I used to like to play all the bossa nova tunes, and so as a result, I know a lot of standards. I learned a lot of standard tunes by just playing with different musicians at all kinds of gigs. And it's interesting because you have so many of these young prodigies now, like for example Joey Alexander and Taylor Ikestey, that really never went through that dues paying process. With internet and Facebook and social media, it's almost like you're just like an instant star. But in my case, as in a lot of musicians of my generation, we did this dues paying. So to continue that, basically, I had a big breakthrough. I started playing on publishing demos at A&M Records, and then started playing on recording sessions when I was living up in Hollywood. And I got a call to play on a sax player's album named Doug Richardson. And the producer was looking for a cross between Bill Evans and Henry Mancini. Bill Evans and Dave Grusin.
Okay.
So I said, I'm your guy. Those are 2 of my heroes. So I think I was playing with Lainie Kazan. And that was another break for me because I became her music director and learned a lot about arranging and conducting through Lainie because I would arrange her charts and conduct the orchestra. So that was a great experience for me, even though she could be tough.
Now, going back to when you started getting these calls to play on records, who was calling you? Was it the producers or was it A&M Records?
That's a good question. No one's ever asked me that. So the early calls I did, a lot of the work I did was for the Almo Irving, and they would hire live. This is before the days of synthesizers and Pro Tools and all that. They would hire musicians to play on the demos, and then they give those demos to the top stars to cover them. And so they had a whole staff of writers, like Allie Willis and David Lasley and Melissa Manchester, even David Foster was one of them, and there's so many. But I actually knew the drummer. The drummer was a guy I grew up with in the South Bay named Gary Ferguson. And Gary somehow got connected with this songwriter named Bernard Eigner. He wrote Everything Must Change. So he got connected with Bernard, and then he said, and Bernard was looking for a piano player. Well, try David out. So I played on Bernard's sessions, and Bernard liked the way I played. And then a few of the other there was another artist named David Lasley, and David was looking for someone, so Gary recommended me, and I started playing on David's demos. Then from there, I started playing on a lot of the other artists' demos for Alma Irving. We go in there every day at 9 o'clock in the morning and just knock them out. And then I started doing the arrangements and got a bigger role. So that's kind of how my studio career began, which is interesting because that is all but gone nowadays. I mean, I don't know how kids get into the studios, but that was a stepping stone and to get into actually making records. And
yeah. Now you just mentioned arranging, which I know that you're an arranger. Mm-hmm. And being that you didn't stay with college, how did you learn the arranging part of it? I mean, because most of the people that I know who are arrangers, they all went through all college and learned all the, did all those theory classes and all that stuff. So how'd you learn that part?
Well, that's absolutely true. I'm sure we talked earlier off mic about Chris Walden, who I have a tremendous amount of respect. Now, there's a real arranger. I mean, that's what he does, and I'm sure he's had quite a bit of schooling. Anyway, so good question. How did I learn how to arrange? Well, that's in terms of really going back to high school, experimenting, listening to records. I had another experience, which I rarely ever talk about, which since we're here, why not? I had a girlfriend that was having an affair with Frank Zappa. This is a true story. And so she said, I think I could get you an introduction with Frank, and she did. And at that time, he had a band called the Grand Wazoo, which was a band of studio musicians playing his music. And Frank wanted to make that transition to just being a conductor and conduct his music. He really wanted the world to know he was a serious composer.
Yeah.
So anyway, she said, he's having a rehearsal and he has a group of woodwinds. Why don't you write something for it? So I did. I was 18. And we went to the rehearsal. He had a place on La Brea Avenue. It was just an empty warehouse, and they were rehearsing there. And I came in with my scores, and he looked at me and he said, "Did you bring your piece?" I said, "Yes." So they did a read down. His group did it. He didn't play in the group, but he had come off this accident in Europe where he had broken his leg. It was a very famous story. Some fan pushed him off the stage, so he was still in crutches at that time. But all the studio musicians like Malcolm McNabb was in that, and a famous trumpet player, and I can't think. But anyway, they played my piece, and I made a recording of it, but that recording has long been lost, unfortunately. So that was my very early experience as a composer arranger. It was Frank Zappa's Grand Wazoo playing my piece, just at a rehearsal, so it never got into the there was no press on it, or there was no performance. It was just this opportunity, but I'll never forget it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's too bad it didn't actually make it to one of his records or something, but I still think that that's a great feather in your cap and pretty fun.
It was, and good for Frank that he was willing to encourage young talent. That was a side people I don't think knew about. He was a lovely, very generous man, and that was huge of him too.
Musical genius too.
Absolute genius, and more, a lot of the classical world's beginning to discover what a genius he was. The music he produced was incredible. And a very kind, generous man. You got all that press for being so weird, but no, he was the real deal. So,
well, would you say maybe I'm going to steal this kind of from from my interview with Chris Walden coming out soon. Chris Walden told me that he went to school and all that,
right?
But the way he learned how to arrange was from doing takedowns off of records.
That's exactly what I did. And thank you for saying that, because I did takedowns. And that, takedown, like Bill Evans solos, but also taking down Henry Mancini arrangements. Henry Mancini was a big influence, and I bought a book, I still have it somewhere, called Sounds and Scores. I bet you Chris has it too, because it was kind of the Bible for young arrangers, where Henry Mancini would lay out how he did it. And Henry Mancini had this sound where he grouped woodwinds together in that lush string section. And so I studied that book. I did takedowns. Another big part of it was when I became music director for Lainie Kazan. Mm-hmm. And one day I said to Lainie, could I can I write a chart for you and I won't charge you? I'll just do it for free. So she let me write a chart. It was short. I mean, the tune was called You Are So Beautiful. And I remember when we first played it with the orchestra, she was very happy with it. And I remember talking to some of the great arrangers of that time, like Don Costa, and studying his scores, looking, how did he do it? How does he get the strings to sound so lush? So it was a lot of that. I'm sure that like Chris and I could be sitting here and compare a lot of notes of just listening to other arrangers. How did they do it? What and that was a lot of how I learned arranging, was just studying other arrangers' works, takedowns. When I was on a session, watching another arranger conduct, and just curious about that whole process. And then, of course, a lot of my growing up was trial and error, and there was a lot of error. Times where I just completely fell on my face, and which again, maybe that's what school does, is that it gives you a chance to fall on your face in this kind of safe environment. But I did it in the real world, and
on the job training.
On the job training.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I've always, when people would ask me, "Hey, Ross, can you go out and do a live recording?" I'd say, "Yeah." Even though I had never done one before.
Exactly.
You say yes, and then you figure out how to do it. And it sounds like you just, as the demands came in or the requests came in, you just figured out how to make it work.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. In fact, I specifically remember when I started with Laney, I was just a rehearsal pianist. I wasn't even playing the gigs. I just, and that story, there's so many stories, but I'll share that one because it is relevant. I was 21 and had a little apartment in Hollywood, and a guitar player called me named Jimmy Stewart and said, I'm looking for a piano player for this tour for Laney Kazan. And who's your favorite piano player? I said, Bill Evans. He said, you're hired. Wow. So they apparently had someone just drop out the last second. So it was Laney Kazan, but it was also the Duke Ellington Orchestra.
Wow.
At that time, it was under the direction of Mercer, his son, and they did a Canadian tour, and Laney was the opener. And so, I mean, I've never been so scared. And then Jimmy Stewart, who was a seasoned professional, he was very afraid to introduce me to Laney because I was 21, I had long hair, I looked like a hippie, and he said, "Oh my God, Laney's going to freak when she meets this kid." And so my dad actually came to the airport to drop me off, and then Jimmy was trying to pretend that my dad was me to Laney. "Oh, this is David," and it was kind of a funny little moment until finally on the airplane she actually met me for real, and she was, "Oh, you're David, okay." And then the first rehearsal, I was just terrified. I had to, sight read all her music, and she came. That one tune I was playing called Blue Skies. I started reading it, and then she came over and said, "Darling, you're playing the rhythm right, but you are in the wrong key."
Oh,
and I realized I hadn't looked at the key signature, and okay. So then I corrected it, and then that started an 8-year relationship, and. A few years later, Laney said, "I've got an opportunity. I need a conductor. Have you ever conducted an orchestra before?" I said, "Yeah, of course." Of course I lied.
Had you?
No. And I said, "I'll just have to figure it out." So actually, the first night I conducted, it went very well. But then, we had our moments. Boy, she would yell and scream. And but somehow all the other piano players that were with her couldn't handle her, and they just left. They said, "I quit." Somehow I stuck it, and maybe that was one of the reasons I did okay in this business, is I would just stick with, I'm not fickle that way at all. I will just hang in there and until someone just literally bails on me, but I didn't bail from her. I hung in there, and she didn't bail from me either. She saw the talent and the potential, and we're very close friends now, but it was really an extraordinary experience for me.
And that was probably your first really big professional gig?
It was.
Would you say? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's great. All right. So then did she stop touring, or did you leave? Or
I left eventually. It was because I was busy doing other stuff, and it was kind of time to go. I remember she said, "Oh, you're pulling a Barry Manilow on me," and I had already started making records at that time, so and the way I got my first record deal, which is unheard of nowadays, but as I mentioned earlier, I was playing on a sax player's album named Doug Richardson, and the producers at that time were looking to really develop fusion jazz. They called it fusion back then, 77. And the label, the head of the label walked in on a record date and said, "You want a record contract?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?" I mean, that's how easy it was.
Wow.
That's what the difference. They just signed me to the deal. I never submitted a demo tape or anything.
And they gave you a budget to go in and record a record?
They gave me a budget. Here's the studio and a 4-album record deal. And they said, "We don't expect you to even hit until your 4th record." So it was all about development, and maybe it wasn't the best deal in the world, but it was a deal.
Yeah.
And it was a real record company. Yeah, that's how it all started with making records.
Wow.
And I think the good news is that very first album, I had a sound. And that sound became eventually, as many of you know, I was one of the architects of smooth jazz, which I,
yeah, you
for
were.
better or worse. But
yeah.
One of the ones that kind of developed that format in terms of the listenability. But that all started with that very first album of writing kind of melodic songs that people could hum, but still playing jazz. And
so the very first record that you did on this deal, did that have a hit on it?
Good question. Yes and no. It did not have a hit on it in America, but it was a hit in London. It was a disco hit called "Life Is Like a Samba."
Oh.
And it was very popular in London. That's why I still go to London every year, because I have a big following there. And then the second album, Can You Imagine, was also not a hit in America, but it was a hit in the Philippines. I mean, a big hit. To the point where that changed my life. I came over there as a superstar when I was playing bars here in Los Angeles. And that's when, and I was kind of struggling in the studios. That's when I decided I'm just going to commit to being an artist. I'm going to commit to being David Benoit. No more nightclub, no more bar mitzvahs. That's over.
No more sidemen.
No more sidemen.
Yeah.
No, I really realized I'm cut out to be an artist, and I really saw that was my calling.
What was the song that put it over the top in the Philippines?
The song was called "Take a Look Inside My Heart." And even to this day, they still have. If I hum that song to any Filipino, they'll kind of, "Oh wow, I remember that song." And yeah, it was a huge hit, gold record over there. And I remember bringing over Arnold McCuller, who's out with James Taylor now, my old friend who sang on it. And we went over there, and the fans just went crazy. I mean, we had a full orchestra and had the whole star treatment with all the press meeting us at the airport. And I remember going into a department store, and they shut down the department store because I was there.
Wow.
David Benoit was in the department store and that kind of crazy stuff.
Did you play all over the Philippines? Or
No, regrettably, I did not. Only Manila.
Yeah.
I wished. And now it's with the new regime, it's been, at least for me, been very difficult to get back there now. I haven't been back in a while. But I miss it. I love the Filipino people, and that was just a life-changing event for me.
All right, so in this 4-record deal that you had, what happened with number 3?
Number 3 was an album called Stages, and that was the one that had "Take a Look Inside My Heart" on it. So that was big hit in the Philippines. Still not much going on in the U.S., but there was starting to be a little bit of buzz about me, and that was when I was starting to transition from being a sideman to just doing my own gigs. And I remember launching my own concert at the Wadsworth Theater. I promoted it myself and had an orchestra, and really trying to develop my artist side. And then I did the last album I did for AVI that was the official album was called Digits. And then I did a Christmas record for them that was actually a very popular seller for them called Christmas Time. And then that's when I was approached by Jeffrey Weber.
Who I've also done an episode with.
I thought you had.
Yeah.
I was thinking that you had worked with Jeff, and Jeff really wanted to do one of the live to 2-track projects with me. So we did a record called This Side Up, which was a real game changer for me. It had a little song called Linus and Lucy.
Oh, yeah.
And basically, and we had a live orchestra at Ocean Way. That's our first experience at Ocean Way. A young assistant engineer named Clark Germain was
Yeah.
because it was Alan Sides, as you may remember.
Sure.
Alan was the engineer, Jeff the producer, and Clark was the one of just an assistant at that time.
Yeah.
And we did that record, and that record did make a lot of noise. It was the airplay was amazing on Linus and Lucy, as you know. I mean,
Yeah. Sure.
And then that's when Larry Rosen from GRP said, I think we better get David on our label. So he called me personally.
And you weren't signed to anybody at that time?
I was signed. Well, it's complicated as the business goes. I had a deal still had a deal with AVI. But when I did this side up, AVI had reneged on royalties and hadn't paid me. So we kind of said to them, there is no deal because you haven't paid the artist. So we went ahead and did this. We did a one-off on Spindletop.
That was the Jeff Weber record?
The Jeff Weber record.
Yeah.
And Jeff knew this investor in Texas, so we did it that way. But it was just a one-off. And then, in fact, I think GRP bought the rights to this side up eventually, took it over. But then I started my long association with GRP. That was probably about the year I got married. That's when I wrote K-Song.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Uh-huh. And so then was K-Song hit in the U.S. then? So was that like your second hit after Linus and Lucy?
Yeah, that was this. Well, I had two on that record, Freedom at Midnight and K-Song were both hits. They were both, in fact, Freedom at Midnight landed on the cover of USA Today, who said it was one of the top picks for songs of that genre.
Well, it most certainly was.
Yeah, it was a very groundbreaking song. I honestly think, Ross, a lot of the success was that incredible drum track by Jeff Porcaro. I listen to it now and go, holy mother of God.
Yeah.
That session.
Well, you can't go wrong with Jeff Porcaro.
You can't. And
no.
It's a classic. I could listen to 100 of my pieces and think, well, that synthesizer or this thing or that. It's kind of. You listen to Freedom at Midnight, and I see why it did well. It just holds up. It sounds it just sounds so good.
No, it's just a great song, great melody,
and that was Nathan East and I collaborating on that tune. So that was a real groundbreaking tune for me, and again, probably my most outside of Linus. Well, the top three, as you might imagine, Freedom at Midnight, Linus and Lucy, and K-Song. Those three are my big top three hits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah. Of course. I don't know if everybody listening knows, but I've done a lot of concerts with you. Done your Christmas tours, probably 8 or 9 years.
Yes.
And so I've had a lot of experience listening to you play. And when any of those songs get played, the crowd goes, as they say, and the crowd goes wild. You know, and. Rightfully so. Great songs. My personal favorite is K-Song.
Oh,
it always has been.
It's kind of like with Christopher Cross and Sailing and Ride with the Wind.
Yeah.
I mean, and what's difficult as artists, and all of us have gone through this. It's not like I haven't written a lot of good songs since then. I've written quite a bit, but it's always those few in the height of your career that are the ones that stick, and they'll stick for the rest of your life. Just like Christopher Cross, or like Tony Bennett with "I Left My Heart in San Francisco," or
sure.
I mean, it's just every artist has those.
They're like signature songs.
Signature songs. And by the way, I feel very grateful. I can't tell you how many times I walk into a bar and there's a guy playing and he's my age and he says, "Oh yeah, I remember when we played together and." You're doing what you do, and here I am, and I have to remind myself on the days that sometimes I get down and I wish I were doing this or that, but
yeah,
not doing too bad.
No. Now, okay, so you had those deals, then you got that deal, you had that big hit. Then tell me what happened next in your career.
Around that time of Freedom at Midnight, K-Song. Well, I started getting a lot of exposure as an artist in America. So I started touring for the first time. Mm-hmm. And I remember some of those crazy tours. We'd have a tour bus. At one point, we actually carried a piano in a trailer.
Well, I did one of those.
You actually did one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's so funny. All the way, and they were Ross. They were crazy times, and that was probably times where I was living large, maybe drinking a little too much, like we all did, and hanging out a little too much, and partying, and I was soaking it all in. All the crowds and the adulation and the late nights and I don't mind sharing this with you, but you know that a few years ago I had a health issue and I had to really dial it back, as a lot of us have in our 60s.
Sure.
We just cannot keep going at that pace.
Yeah.
So we want to kill ourselves.
Can't run an engine at 100 miles an hour for too long. Yeah,
not all the time. So I've dialed it back quite a bit these days. The hang is going back to my hotel room and watching CNN.
Yeah.
But back then I think the main thing was that I became a touring artist. But another career developed at that time, which I always wanted to do, which was film scoring. So I started scoring television shows. Right around that same time, and I had a network show called Sisters on NBC, and then I started scoring movies of the week for CBS, and at the same time scoring all the music for the Charlie Brown TV shows.
You're right. Yeah, that was a big.
So that
break.
was a big thing for me, and I'll tell you, right around that time, '80s, it was some huge income producing years for me, and that's when we bought our home in Palos Verdes and began to really live large. And it was a great time. I mean, between touring and doing, and I got a call. One of the biggest calls I ever got was from Clint Eastwood to do one of his pictures. And he was just the director. He was the producer. He wasn't starring in it. Unfortunately, the film, if I mention the film to you, you'll know why it didn't do well. It was called The Stars Fell on Henrietta, which... It just tanked. It didn't go anywhere. I was very proud of that score, but yeah, I conducted a 60-piece orchestra on the Warner Sound stage, the whole bit. I mean, it was a real incredible moment with Clint in the booth. And
how cool!
It was
to hang with
total
Clint.
Cool. What a gracious, wonderful man. And he actually called me for a Brubeck documentary. He produced a documentary on the music of Dave Brubeck and featured me in that documentary. But it was very heady times, Ross. Those are just like ego, almost kind of, wow, Clint Eastwood. And I was touring and making records, and those records were, we were in the Hot 100. We were selling a lot of records for jazz artists, and so the budgets started getting huge to the point where it was getting into, making a record for $200,000. You can imagine that today? No. You can't imagine it, but that was the marketplace back then. So we'd go in and. It was fun because a lot of what it afforded me to do was to hire really great artists I admired, like Michael Franks and Larry Carlton, Earl Klugh. And say, name your price, So because we had it in the budget, and recording albums with full orchestras, and then around that time I also built my own room in Torrance, 29th Street studio. And Clark Germain did a lot of work there. So he and I, and it's funny, Ross, how Clark and I were like working together almost every day. We'd hang out every night, and as things change, I even rarely see him anymore. Things changed, the business changed, and I miss him too because, and in fact, I called him the other day. So let's get together, at least have a drink or something.
Well, because you're not making big budget records anymore.
Big budget records, exactly. So the industry changed, as you know. But those are some amazing times, as you remember back, and this is like around 87, 88. Those are my highest career earning times. And I'm grateful to have had those times. But yeah, that was the touring and the movie scores and all that stuff.
Were there any of the movies that you did, even TV movies that people would know?
There was one I scored a Sally Field picture called The Christmas Tree,
I think I saw that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And I've gotten more requests on that and score, and I was very proud of that score. In fact, in Film Score Monthly, they voted that as the best television movie score of that year, tied with some other composer. And I've always, actually, it's really a great regret of mine. I felt I was very talented as a film score composer, and it was a side of my career that never took off. And I can't even tell you exactly why it didn't. I think one of the reasons is that there was too much of a perception that I was a concert artist, that you're a concert artist. And when you get into film scoring, you have to devote 100%. The directors expect that you're going to be there for them. And I remember being late to one meeting from this one director, and I was on tour and the plane was late, and he was so mad. And I guess looking back, I wished I had devoted more time, but it was something I loved doing, and I felt like I was good at it. And some people would know some of the Charlie Brown episodes. Like one of the ones I did was the one about it was the Charlie Brown. Oh, You're in Love, Charlie Brown. I did that episode, and but nothing. I never did anything that was really that famous.
Mm-hmm. Well, talking about the Charlie Brown stuff, you also met Charles Schulz, correct?
I did.
Yeah.
And that was another great career achievement for me, meeting him up at his studio in Santa Rosa, and actually consulting with him on a couple of the shows about what Schroeder would play. And that was amazing to me, because I always felt like I was Charlie Brown from day one. I totally, and I've said that in concert, and always got a few laughs, but it's really true. Feeling like that was the kid, the loser, or the kid that didn't get the Christmas present, or always that feeling. So a lifelong passion and identity to Charlie Brown, and here I'm meeting the guy that created him.
Right,
really amazing.
Well, I know you've mentioned that you really liked Charles Schulz. When we've done shows up in Northern California, you always invite him to the shows, and you had a lot of respect for him.
Yeah, and I'm still close with the family. I just had a meeting with Craig Schulz, and we're talking about some projects together, and when I was up in Santa Rosa just about a month ago. Mm-hmm. Sadly, Mrs. Schulz lost her home in that fire.
Oh,
yeah. The longtime family home. So that's been tough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so where do we go from there, David?
Well, getting into the big change for me after all the heady years of touring and was when I decided to have a family, and I think that's when I started kind of slowing down a little bit and wanted to raise my daughter. You know, she's adopted. Mm-hmm. We really wanted a family, but it didn't work out for us. So right around the time we adopted her, we also bought a piece of land in Palos Verdes, and we had this crazy dream that we'd build our dream house, which was, it was crazy. But looking back in my history, I've taken some huge chances and just sort of just went straight forward. So this was another one. I just felt like we could do this. And so we started doing the design work and planning for the house that we're sitting in right now. It was a dream of mine. So that was a lot of my life starting in the year 2000 was just designing this house, and then June came along, so that was a big change. And then the other thing that big huge change was I landed the job as music director of the Asia America Symphony. Mm-hmm. So the whole model of my life changed from the touring musician and scoring and selling tons of records, making a lot of money, to raising a family and inheriting this orchestra. And to get into that story for a minute, what was so exciting about having an orchestra was that now I could really experiment with composition and arranging and orchestration and really get my chops together and conducting. And this orchestra had a very strict classical maestro, so they wanted somebody that was more pop oriented, and they liked well, my wife was on the board, so she recommended me. So again, it was like, have you ever been a music director of an orchestra? No, but I'll give it a shot, So that first concert, I was pretty nervous. But one thing I did do is I formed a youth orchestra in an adjunct in addition to the union orchestra because they wanted to build up their youth program. So I felt like I could do that. So we started that orchestra I think in 2002. To make a long story short, the youth orchestra did very well.
That's the Asia America
Youth Orchestra. That's the one. Yeah. Still at 15 years later, I'm still music director, still running it. But the funding that we had, Yamaha was our big, not Yamaha, sorry, Toyota was the big sponsor. So they pulled out, and then we lost a lot of sponsorship. Basically, we couldn't afford to keep the union orchestra. So what we do now is we add union players to our marquee concerts. So we add the union players to our existing youth orchestra. We getting some really good results by. So
they'd be like the first chair players.
First chair players. In each section, and like we had Keiko Matsui. We presented her last summer at JCC. So my life had changed quite a bit direction wise from the. I mean, I don't really tour anymore. I mean, it's more, except for the Christmas tour. That's the only time I ever do. And now here June is graduating from high school. It's 17 years later. But a lot of my life has been working with youth, with kids. It's been a mission of mine to foster new talent and to find those kids that have the talent. I can't tell you how many letters, how many phone calls, how many people. Even just walking down the street the other day, a gentleman came up to me. Yeah, you helped my daughter get into college, and because you turned her on to music, and so that's been a whole shift in my life from that crazy partying road days to someone that is nurturing youth.
You're all grown up now.
Well, I'm grown up, exactly. So it's funny you should say that, but it's true how life changes, how we go through these, changes.
Well, with the kids in this youth orchestra, what's the age range?
Age range starting pretty young, because we don't really have you don't have to be a minimum age; you just have to be really good. So kids as young as 10, 11.
And they have to try out to be in it?
They have to try out every year. But most of our students are high school. Uh-huh. A typical age is probably 14 to 16, right in that range. So yeah, they're all the way from junior high school, and then we're very clear. Once they graduate high school, we do invite some members to come back, but the regular weekly membership are with kids that are in grade school.
Well, most of those kids that are in college, they're probably going to be playing in their college orchestras, and
exactly. Or sometimes they don't even continue.
Or maybe
music.
they stop playing.
They stop. Right. Yeah. It changes. So that it becomes a different thing.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah.
You're getting my whole life story here.
Well, yeah, that's what this is all about,
that's awesome.
David. Yeah. So, okay, so that, and then I know because I advance all your shows. So most of the shows that you do are kind of one-off things. Maybe you go out and do one or two shows at a time, and you come back home, and one or two and back home, except for the Christmas tour. So why don't you tell me how that started?
Well, there's two Christmas tours. And so digressing a bit, how do I frame this? Because you've got the Dave Koz Christmas tour, and you've got the David Benoit, Charlie Brown tribute tour. So there's two tours, and they are interconnected. So I'm going to explain that in a minute. But basically, after Charles Schultz died, I really wanted to do a tribute concert to him. And so the first Charlie Brown tour was actually just a tribute to Charles Schultz. So we would, and I remember that tour. I'm trying to remember I think it might have been Zero Nyland did that one, that very first one. And we had some videos, and then somewhere along the way, so you had that. So that was the year 2000.
And that was only intended to be just a one-time
just a one-off, one thing, tribute to Charles Schultz. So meanwhile, roll back to about 1996, or not maybe 98, because it was 20 years ago. I'm doing an interview with Dave Cause, just like you and I are doing. And I said to Dave, he had just lost his father, and I'd lost my mom. I said, Chris is going to be tough without her parents. I said, and I didn't know he was Jewish, but I said, why don't we go out and do a Christmas tour? He goes, that's a great idea. And the thing about Dave, he gets an idea. So that Christmas tour, which has been his crown jewel for 20 years, now he has a crew of 20 and, 2 tour buses, and it's an enormous operation that he built it. It's all him. He did it.
And he has big name musicians.
Yeah. That's how he's been able to keep it going. But he credits me with being the founding father of that tour. And so the first few years I did it, after about the 5th year I was doing it, I started kind of climbing the walls, and I was calling my agent saying, I got to take a break. This is too much. And I want to do my own thing. Mm-hmm. I love Dave, but I want to do my own thing. And so Jim Gosnell, my agent, said, why don't you do the Charlie Brown, your little tribute to Charlie Brown, Charles Schultz, make that into a Christmas tour? I thought, that's an idea, because basically that's where all that TV show was a Christmas show.
Yeah.
So we with the first year we did a major thing with Stig Egren. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of like what caused. We started at the top and worked our way down.
Just so people know, when we say Stig Egren, and both you and I know who he is, why don't you just tell us a little bit about who Stig is?
Stig Egren is a very well-known live show producer, and one of his famous ones was the Elvis on Broadway, where he would have a live band playing, and then there was kind of like a video of Elvis Presley, but the band was live and they would take tracks. So he kind of did this multimedia type live show, and very successful at it. So he produced a Charlie Brown tour. So we had a full orchestra in every city. Melissa Manchester was on the bill, Al Jarreau. It was Jamie Tate's first tour too. I remember how nervous he was. It was so cute. Kind of like he was just just a little kid back then. So we did this tour. We were doing arenas.
Wow.
Yeah.
Started out at
the
top.
Only problem is that we lost, thousands, like maybe hundreds of, it was a disaster.
Yeah.
And Stig, I remember when the tour was over and my agent, well, how did it go? He said, Stig Egren says he doesn't ever want to hear about Charlie Brown ever again. So after that year, and I don't know what year, I think it might have been 2002 2003. We had just built this house because I remember him coming over. So 2003, we just stopped. Then I got back on Dave's tour. So it was dead. Then we started talking with, maybe it was my manager, Ron Moss, or it was Jim, but I said, why don't we just go the other way? Like, just do something really simple and build it back up again. So we took a couple of years off, and then we decided to do that. Let's just do this really simple, just with a trio, maybe and a singer, and we'll just go out to a few. So that was about already maybe 10 years ago, and I think you were on the first of that.
I didn't even realize that was the first of that series. Yeah,
that series where maybe I don't know, what was it, Zero? Maybe it did the very first one. I actually see my memory is.
Well, I understand. Believe me,
you were at pretty much the beginning, and you've been with it ever since. But we just decided to go real simple. Now we've turned it into a nice little. It's a modest little tour, but it does well, and we have a children's choir in every city, and it's not the big production crazy show like Dave, but it's a very heartfelt, nice music tour to the music of Charlie Brown, and we are again going to do it this year. I did come back for Dave's show for his 20th anniversary. That it was spectacular.
I'll bet.
And he's got a first class operation.
He's a great entertainer, isn't he?
A great entertainer. Just amazing what he can do. But I do that for a month, but I wouldn't be something I would want to keep coming back to. So,
well, I know that in your heart you really love doing your own tour.
I do, and I don't make nearly as much as you know. if all I did was work for a cause, I mean, I'd be rich. I mean, to be honest, and it's okay. It's just he pays some very big dollars. And so it's nice to jump on that once in a while and have a little money in the bank. But I still, and you mentioned the word artist. I just have always come back to being true to myself and being who I am. And it's hard for me to, because to wear the uniform and do the dance steps and. But that's kind of what you're expected to do. So,
no, David, I haven't seen the David costume. Do you wear a uniform and do dance steps?
I did wear a uniform, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, I tried
to have to go see that then.
Yeah.
if you ever do it again.
I got a picture of it.
Well, people on this podcast aren't going to see it, so.
No, that's right. That's right. But I remember when he said, we're going to wear these white jackets. And I said, oh, well, I've got a white jacket. I'll just go with that. I said, no, it's a jacket I will purchase for you. It has to match. It's a uniform,
Yeah.
So what can he say?
Well,
okay, all right. And Dave is one of those. He's very sublime. He's Davey. I mean, he really would mean he's very sweet, but he always gets what he wants.
Gets his way. Yeah. Well,
absolutely, as he should.
Why shouldn't he? He's the artist. He's the one that's bringing in.
I did joke a little bit with Marc Antoine about that, and Marc and I have been doing some dates together. Because Mark had the same delay. He said, "You're lucky." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "You get to sit behind the piano. You don't have to be out there doing all the dance steps."
Yeah. You picked the right instrument. Right?
So at least I could sit back and. But I remember one of the most fun musical moments was playing Chris Walden's chart. He had a chart, and it was hard. Chris writes, which I love about him. He don't mess around, and so especially it wasn't so hard to sight read it, but it was really hard to memorize it because every single verse he'd change up the chords and he'd change up the melody, and that's why he's so brilliant. It was an arrangement of "Let It Snow," and it was a big band arrangement, and so the piano would be playing all the bassy and all the and I had more fun playing. I mean, it was worth it for me just to play that arrangement. That because he did it for a Cause album, I guess, and Cause really liked the way he did. So I'll pay Chris a compliment here and say, what a great chart.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Cause tour, Christmas tour, and then there's another thing that I don't think that we've covered yet, and it's you've been doing this for, I'm going to guess maybe 5 years or so. Radio personality.
Yes.
Tell us about that, David.
K-Jazz 88.1.
In
was
Los
Oscar
Angeles.
Peterson in Oscar, one of the finest jazz pianists of our day, doing what he does best, playing the piano. I don't know, but that was another one of these as things have happened in my life. I don't think I've ever auditioned for a gig ever or ever submitted a demo tape. I'm one of those, I've gone through my life with just getting these calls out of the blue. And I'm probably about due for one again. It's been about 5 years. That was the last kind of call out of the blue. But I did. I got a call from Saul Levine, the longtime owner of K-Jazz, and he owned KBCA Radio back in the 60s, the radio station I grew up with. And he called me. He said, I heard this interview you did, and I think you have a voice for radio. And come into my office. So I did. And I was just struck by how smart he was at 81 years old or however old he was at the time. And he's still running it. It's extraordinary. Very smart, visionary man. And so I went on live the first, I remember going to hear Bubba Jackson and driving out to Long Beach where we used to broadcast. And then the day came and I was live on the air. And I had one of the DJs was sitting right next to me, kind of coaching me, helping me out. And I remember on the playlist, I had all these arrows and notes. And I would look at another DJ, and he would have no notes, nothing, just read right off the script. And of course, I do that now. I don't make any more notes. But back then, I made all these notes about when I'm talking, what I'm supposed to talk about. And one of the hardest things, Ross, you might appreciate this, is when you're on the air, when you're talking about, and they like that. They like what they like about my show are the anecdotes I'll tell. Like, for example, I met Bill Evans in New York. how do you wrap that up? How do you make it succinct? You can't just ramble. That's the biggest problem with being on the radio. You got to just wrap it up and be right to the point. Not this. Yeah, Bill and I. Well, it was like really cool, and he's like, you have to find a way to in just a very short little amount of time get right to the point, and then get on to the next artist.
Right. That's kind of like what they call in sales as your elevator pitch.
Oh, right. Right.
Where you have to say something, and you have to say it succinctly and quickly, and get it done and make your point.
Yeah.
And then move on.
Right.
And so that's what you had to learn how to do.
Exactly.
This. And so in old terms, it's a DJ. You're a DJ.
DJ.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But nowadays, it's a radio personality. Yeah. and was I correct? Is it about 5 years you've been doing
It was 5 years. Maybe a little more than, I think it's going to be 6 years. This year's the 6th year. Because the first year, in fact, I'm going to have to really, because as I get older, my timelines just get worse and worse. You probably have that too. You can't even remember. Like,
oh no, I remember everything.
Oh no, I'm the worst at that. I can't.
No, that's. I think that's pretty normal, David.
Yeah.
Yeah. We all think that we're the only ones, but that's not true.
Gosh. Yeah.
But you, I know that you're not making a fortune doing that. So you're really doing that. Another labor of love. You like doing this. It's fun for you.
I do like doing it. I also for a couple of reasons. One is that I like the idea that I'm going through a lot of CDs and what artists are hot right now, who's hot in jazz, and I really get a cross section anywhere from Latin jazz to the real edgier, straight ahead guys, to the not so much smooth jazz. They don't focus on that a lot, which I think is good. Because there's watercolors for that, and there's other outlets for smooth jazz. So this is more. I mean, what the interesting thing is their mix is interesting because they will play Jeff Lorber, they'll play occasionally Dave Koz, not too often, but mostly they'll a lot of Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Bill Evans, Oscar Peterson. Those are their core, or Wes Montgomery. Wes is one artist they play all the time, and for good reason, because Wes is one of those few artists, a pure jazz musician, but also he crossed over. And anyone can hear Wes Montgomery and feel good. It's like his guitar playing is like everyone likes Wes Montgomery.
Sure.
And those are the artists they tend to gravitate to. Everyone likes Stan Getz.
Now, do they pick out the playlist?
They do.
Do you have any influence in that at all?
Well, I do. I consult with Saul Levine, and Saul knows the artists I like. He'll make sure that there's always a lot of Bill Evans on my show, and then I consult with the new artists, like what artists I like. And then on my Saturday show, it's called Jazz in the 88s. I'll actually do my own playlist on that one. They'll send me a template, and then I'll make adjustments, and I'll even bring CDs I have at home and play those. So that's a fun show to do too.
Did they play any David Benoit?
Oh yeah, pretty regularly.
Usually
nice. One time per show.
Cool. And now, is it straight DJing, or do you actually do you interview people on that show?
Well, that is a new thing I'm starting as of I don't know when this show is going to air, but I am starting that soon. I'm going to start my first interview show, maybe just only once a month. I'm going to pick a piano player that lives in Los Angeles that I know that we could just talk about music and piano. And my first interviewee is going to be Michael Lang, the very accomplished studio musician, jazz pianist, and dear friend. I've known Mike for many, many years, so that'll be a nice, relaxed, fun interview. It's always probably like in your case too. It's always, at least in the early stages of doing something like this, find people that you really like interviewing, that you're comfortable with.
Well, for me right now, I'm mostly interviewing people that I've worked with.
Right.
Eventually, I'm going to run out. But that's going to take a while because I've had a pretty long career like you have.
You've been in the business a long time.
I've met a lot of people, and I'm surprised at how many people have been gracious enough to say yes
That's
to
great.
me. So like you, and I thank you again on the air. Thank you for doing this with me. When I called you to do this, I was like, I wonder if he'll do this. So I really do thank you. It's great. I think this is going to be wonderful.
I think the fact that you were willing to make the long trek, I mean, you live in a whole other county, I mean, so that this was quite a drive for you to come down here, so I do appreciate
well
that.
worth it.
Yeah.
Well worth it, yeah.
Awesome.
Now, so you're gonna do Christmas tour again, of course, this year, and then just continue on. Do you have anything else like big plans for maybe trying to break back into the TV scoring or film scoring or anything of that nature?
Well, that's a good question, and I would love to get back into that. And I'll be honest, I don't know how at this point.
Yeah, it's not an easy
it
nut
is
to crack.
not. I've actually had meetings with one of my friends, is the head of the TV and film department at BMI, and the first thing she says is, "Why?"
Yeah.
It's a very brutal, cutthroat business now. It's a very different business.
High pressure too.
Ultra high pressure.
The scheduling,
the politics involved, and the pressure of hits, and it's just a very different business. So I don't even know if it's something I would have the stomach for at this point. But it's I do want to be looking for more opportunities as a composer. That's very important for me, and I haven't done a lot of development lately. I feel like a need for that now. It's just been kind of going through the motions, working, and I have a lot of interesting projects. Like I'm doing you'll be interested in this, a very special symphonic tribute to the music of Dave Brubeck. That'll be next year with the Peninsula Symphony up in Monterey.
I know you're a pretty big fan of his, right?
A big fan, and it's with two of his sons, with Chris and Dan Brubeck, and Taylor Eichste's putting the whole thing together. So I'll be doing some arrangements, orchestration for that, and playing piano. And then I'm going to South Korea with my youth orchestra. Oh. And I'm debuting a brand new composition called East Meets West, A Time for Hope. And I'm kind of, and I'm gonna say something political here, and you can keep it if you want, because I know your politics and you know mine. But I'm going to say this is good news, that I'm actually very excited about Trump right now. The fact that he is willing to meet with Kim Jong-un. The fact, if there's some way that we can make some kind of relationship with that country, and just the idea that now South and North are talking rather than blowing each other up, they're talking. And I don't know whether it's Trump's bravado or whatever he did, but something he did to get people to get back onto the negotiating table, I think is exciting. And so getting just that little moment, getting back to what my point is that I see a really great time for hope with the two Koreas.
There's nothing wrong with peace, is there?
Exactly.
However,
give peace a chance.
However it happens. You can complain about how things happen, but the bottom line is peace. Who can argue with peace?
Yeah,
it's great.
So I wrote this piece. So we're going to debut it in Korea with my youth orchestra. We're joining another couple of youth orchestras around the country. So that'll be in June. So I'm very excited about that. And so there's some.
You should be excited about that. That's a big thing.
There's some really cool things coming up. But I really want to continue to develop. Because the good news is, I feel great. Never felt better. And really want to get out there more and more as a composer, conductor. And of course, I love to play and never get tired of getting out and playing for the fans, and they keep coming. And I'm having a lot of fun, too, with this package of Marc Antoine.
Yeah, you've been doing a lot of shows with him.
He's very musical and likes to have a good time. And so there's a lot of cool stuff going on.
That's great. Well, I think that I've asked you all the questions. Is there anything else that you want to throw in that I haven't thought of, David?
Wow. Well, I think feels pretty complete.
Good.
It's a good cross section.
I think I got you. I got you to spill the beans today. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, David, once again, thank you for granting the interview, and I'm sure that everybody's going to enjoy it. So we're going to say goodbye. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Ross, and good luck with the show. I'm really looking forward to hearing some of the other podcasts as well.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
The Rossaround Backstage Podcast. wants to thank my good friend Tim Heinz for the original music that you are listening to now. We are currently looking for sponsors for the Rossaround Backstage podcasts so that we can continue to bring you interesting stories like the one you just heard. I can be reached through Facebook or email me at rosspallone@me.com. Thank you for listening.